Good morning again. First thing I'd like to do is thank you. I know yesterday I thank you for being potential jurors, but today you are in fact the jurors. You were selected to be the jurors because myself and other counsel, as well as Ms. Williams, paid attention to the course of jury selection and felt that you were the best to come in and try this particular case and listen to the evidence that is presented before you. And once again, thank you very much for your civic duty in coming in and doing this. We literally cannot do this without you. You are in a little bit unique situation because yesterday you heard a little bit about the facts of this case, but now you get to hear what they call the rest of the story. So what happened? How did we get here today? What you're going to hear is back in December 16th of 2000. Jerry Michael Williams, he goes as Mike Williams. He's an avid duck hunter. He likes to go out and duck hunt on a regular basis. On this particular day, he went out and did that very thing. He went out and go duck hunting. You're going to hear that this is also the anniversary with himself, and at the time he was married to Denise Williams. This is their anniversary day. So on this particular day, there's a plan where he's going to go out, he's going to duck hunt, he's going to come home, and then afterwards they are going to leave and go to Apalachicola to celebrate their anniversary that evening and stay at the Gibson Inn and have dinner and things along those lines. You're going to hear that on this particular day, one of the places that he typically goes to is Lake Jackson, or Lake Seminole, excuse me. Lake Seminole, about an hour to the west of Tallahassee, northwest a little bit. It's actually in Jackson County, which is the next county over from Gadsden. And that's where he goes. And actually where he hunts is over here on the west side of Lake Seminole, just around the area of Steeds. What you're going to hear is that he never came back. He disappeared. In the afternoon hours, Florida Wildlife Commission are contacted, as well as other family members, and they start trying to figure out where he is. And they go looking for him. And a landing right off of on the north side, on the west side of Lake Jackson, Lake Seminole, they find his Bronco as well as a trailer. You're going to hear that large number of friends, family members, FWC officers, civilians, law enforcement, everybody converges on here and starts to try and find him. You're going to hear this right here is a little what they call a slide where you can launch a boat from. And then as you can see, this is an old, Lake Seminole is an old pecan farm that they flooded with a dam, so it's a reservoir. And as you can see, you have a lot of stumps in this particular area. The initial thought, of course, is that he possibly was running the boat out to go to his duck hunting area. He hit a stump, possibly was thrown overboard, boat went off. And they were hopeful to find him, maybe on this island back in here, or something along those lines, and move on. You're going to have an opportunity to hear from a couple of the FWC officers that were there, one of which is Alton Renew. Alton Renew comes out there, and he's kind of the coordinator of this whole thing. And he kind of takes the lead on it, and they conduct a search. And what you're going to hear is it's a very methodical search. They do grid patterns. They have a helicopter up. You have dive teams from Montgomery County, Alabama. You've got Jackson County Sheriff officers that are there participating in this. And as I mentioned, you've also got friends and families that are participating in this search as well. Multiple boats are out there looking for him, trying to find him. As I said, helicopter from up above looking around. And again, keep in mind this is a Saturday, December 16th of 2000. And you're going to hear during the evening hours of that, a cold front came through, and it was actually around 70 degrees, a nice balmy winter day in Florida on the 16th. However, a cold front rolls through that evening. And you're going to hear that there's torrential downpours, and of course searchers aren't able to search during that particular time, and that there are huge downpours and the temperature drops dramatically. It's in the 20s the next day, in the teens, everybody's bundled up, lots of fires trying to stay warm and things along those lines. But what you're going to hear is the following morning, they found Mike's boat. This is Mike's hunting boat, duck hunting boat. As you can see, it's what they call a canoe. It's essentially a canoe that's powered by a motor. It's got a long, what they call a go devil, I guess it is. It's a long shaft there with a propeller on the end to get it to move through, and the idea is it can move through these stump areas in very shallow waters. You're going to hear that they actually found that boat about 75 yards away from where they found the Bronco. It's another little cove that's in this particular area is where they found the boat. As I mentioned, it's an extremely extensive search. This originally started out as a search and rescue. They were hoping to find him. You will hear from Scott Dungy, who was a friend of the family, a friend of Mike's. Goes up in the helicopter with FWC and is looking out, trying to find him, hopefully on the islands that are in that area, maybe got thrown from the boat and was able to swim to safety and was just waiting to be rescued. As I mentioned, weather was a factor in the multiple ways that they do this search. What you're going to hear is, unfortunately, during that time period, they were not able to find Mike. Mr. Williams is still missing, and reality sets in that at this point it's become a recovery operation. What you're going to hear is that they bring out search dogs. They're going to have probing poles, and what those are PVC poles, where they take and they push them down and they try and find Mike's body. And they're trying to feel for things that give way a little bit as a body would, not a tree stump, which is obviously much harder. As you're also going to hear, there are divers that were involved in this particular search. The initial search lasted approximately 2 weeks trying to recover the body. Out there every single day, helicopters, dive teams, every single day for 2 weeks. Scaled back to a degree at that particular time, however, FWC was a constant presence there. They were always looking, did spot checks, as well as friends that were there until all the way until February, months later. Kind of a picture of what we're talking about here, where you've got the Broncos found, the boats found, there's a tree stump here, a tree stump here, as well as all the other trees you saw at the ranger station across the way here. What you're going to hear is that at the beginning of the search, Scott Dungy did a polling thing that we previously talked about, and he got a little bit of a giveaway right in this area, right off that island they thought maybe he had swam to. And you're going to hear they put down bamboo sticks there to try and mark that particular spot. And a great deal of the search actually concentrated in this particular area. There's a hole there, if you will. It's a deeper area. Most of this stuff is about 4 to 8 feet deep is most of this particular area. However, there's a hole here, which is much deeper, 12-foot range. That's where he felt that initial giveaway, and that's where they concentrated the search on. And they marked it with... initially with bamboo sticks and trees, and eventually that transformed into PVC pipes that they put down for a little bit more permanent aspect. So this is where the search concentrated on. After all of that search efforts, all those people that were out there, the constant searching, the helicopters, found a hat. That's it. 6 months afterwards, you're going to hear from Joe Sheffield, who is the person that goes out there and avidly fishes at that particular time. It's summer months now, and he's out there fishing, and he comes across a set of waders, and he's going to describe to you what those waders look like. As a result, search goes back. You're going to hear from Scott Dungy as well as Alton Renew, who is present. They sent a diver down to that particular location. And again, they are back at that marker, that hole, that 12-foot hole where they felt the initial push. And they marked with the bamboo sticks, ultimately the PVC pipe. And what you're going to hear is not only were the waders found, but there was a jacket found, a flashlight, and a hunting license. That hunting license belonged to Mike Williams. It's an Arkansas hunting license is what was found. These are the items that were found 6 months later. Well, the hunting license. It's a flashlight that's found. Flashlight was one of those mag lights. Was actually still functional. What we're going to hear, unfortunately, at that point, Mike still has not been recovered, and the case goes cold. At this point, it is marked as a missing persons. There's been no evidence of any foul play in any way, shape, or form. It's simply a duck hunting boat accident. Body was never found. There were even theories of alligators possibly had eaten him. Fast forward to 2003. Brian Winchester. Brian Winchester is a lifelong friend of Mike Williams. What you're going to hear is that Brian Winchester, Denise Williams, a lady named Kathy Winchester, is now Kathy Thomas. They all went to school together at North Florida Christian. And you're going to hear that over the years, Brian and Kathy got married, Denise and Mike got married. They had couple things together. They'd go out and they'd go to concerts together. They'd go over to each other's houses. They even had kids roughly around the same time. Mike and Denise had a little girl. Brian and Kathy had a little boy. But following all of this, in 2003, Brian Winchester and Kathy Winchester are now getting divorced. And now Brian and Denise, Mike's widow, are now starting to date. There are suspicions, and law enforcement takes another look. Now keep in mind, it's not 2018. We're talking about 2000. Okay? We're talking about an investigation, and what we're talking about with records and things along those lines. This is the days of flip phones and Nokia phones. These are the days in which you still got phone calls at your house. You had the answering machine where you had to push the button and listen that you didn't have any messages from all your friends. Not today. Records back then, people called each other at the house. Home records, the phone records back then consisted of long-distance calls only. Any phone records regarding the local calls, if you get the bill, and the bill would say local service, but it never gave you the breakdown of calls like we do now with the cell phones. You had to go back, and the only breakdowns you actually had were of the long-distance calls. So phone records are much different than they are today. So we go back to 2000, we're trying to get this information. Also texting. Texting was back in the day where there's Nokia phones and flip phones. We didn't have the keyboards. You had to actually type out a text message, AAA, BBB, CCC, in order to get the letters, in order to get going. But law enforcement tries to get the phone records. It's too late. At this point, keep in mind, this was not a homicide investigation. It wasn't even a missing person, or it wasn't a suspicious person's investigation. It was simply a boating accident. At the time of the event, nobody realized that we would get where we are today. This was a missing person investigation. As a result, it was not a homicide investigation. When they realized there were possible suspicious circumstances and they reclassified it from a missing person to a suspicious situation, phone records have been purged. They only keep them for so long. What they were able to do is go back and get life insurance policies and life insurance information on Mike Williams. And what they found out is that Denise Williams was paid out $1.75 million as a result of his death. She was the sole beneficiary, no one else. You're then going to hear in 2005, Brian and Denise get married. At this point, there are definitely suspicions going on, but there's no evidence other than what you've heard. And the case goes cold again. At this point, it's been reclassified as a suspicious death, or a suspicious person, suspicious case. But nothing has developed. The years between 2012 and 2016, Brian and Denise starts to get a separation. They buy a house for $650,000 off Lake Jackson, but they never live in it. They remain separated for 4 years. But in 2016, everything changes. In August of 2016, Brian Winchester, in the early morning hours, frustrated with the separation, frustrated with where the marriage is going, frustrated with Denise, crawls in the back of her car at her home. He does so with a firearm. He orders her to drive somewhere. Denise, you're going to hear, talks him out of going to that particular area and ends up going to a CVS pharmacy on the north side of town. Instead, somehow she's able to do that. And you're going to hear they have a long conversation about multiple things, and you're going to hear from Brian Winchester, and he's going to tell you what they talked about. And what you're going to hear is they separate at that point, and Denise talks him into letting her go. And he does. And they're going to talk later on that evening is the plan. The agreement is she's not going to go to law enforcement. But she does. You're actually going to hear that David McCraney, who was the brother-in-law of Denise Williams now, is a law enforcement officer at Tallahassee Police Department. And he gets on the phone with her and talks her through what to do and takes her all the way to Leon County Sheriff's Department. On the phone with her the whole way. Then she gets to Leon County Sheriff's Department. She reports that he was kidnapped, and now Brian Winchester is charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault with a firearm, and this carries a potential life imprisonment. In October 2017, Brian Winchester gives a statement to law enforcement and he confesses to murdering Mike Williams. What he tells us is that prior to the death in 1997, there's a Sister Hazel concert at the Floyd's Music Shop, which is off Tennessee Street. The Tennessee Strip is commonly referred to, right there by Florida State University. And there's a Sister Hazel concert, and they went there, and they actually were there with a couple other people, including Mike. But that's when everything started with them. At that point, on that day, is when they're starting and the relationship began, 1997, 3 years prior to Mike's death. He talks about the insurance policies. He tells the law enforcement about these insurance policies. Interestingly enough, one of the insurance policies, there actually are 3 individual policies, one for $1 million, one for $500,000, and one for $250,000. What he tells law enforcement is that the $1 million policy was actually written by Brian Winchester himself. He was an insurance salesperson by trade. And about 6 months before his disappearance or his murder, that Brian Winchester and Mike Williams talked about getting this particular policy and the amounts associated with it. And Brian's going to tell you the intention is that he's going to get this $1 million policy, and what he's going to do then is allow that $500,000 policy, which is the previous one, to lapse, but it doesn't lapse until March of 2001. What he's also going to tell you is that during that time period of writing that policy, there's discussions between him and Denise about how they can be together. Well, keep in mind, at this point, they've been dating for 2 years behind backs of Mike and Kathy, their respective spouses. So they talk about it for a long time. Different scenarios go. Denise didn't want to be a divorcee. When North Florida Christian, very religious families, didn't like the stigma of being a divorcee. They talk about possibly killing both Mike and Kathy. There's a discussion about going out fishing on the boat offshore, and that somehow Mike and Kathy would fall overboard, and miraculously Denise and Brian would be the ones that were rescued and therefore be together. Brian says no. He says, I don't want to kill the mother of my child. Apparently killing his best friend is okay, but killing the mother of his child is not. So they settle on killing just Mike. Denise likes the sound of being a widow much more than a divorcee. A widow gets sympathy from the community, center of attention. And they talk about how to do it. Go back and you talk about the insurance policies. Time is of the essence. I'm sorry, that should have been the $500,000 expires. At this particular time, you've got the $1 million policy, the $500,000 policy, and the $250,000 policy all in play. The $500,000 policy is going to expire in March. So if they're going to do it, why not do it at a time when they get the most payout? 1.75 sounds better than 1.25. Had to look like an accident. Obviously can't be caught with a murder. So they had to make it look like an accident. Just so happens not long before this, Brian went hunting with Mike. They go hunting regularly. They went up to Arkansas. Remember, we found the Arkansas license in the waiter 6 months later. And that particular time, one of the things that happened is Mike fell out of the boat. That's an interesting situation. Whenever these duck hunters go out and hunt, they wear waders. Waders are notorious for situations in which the person falls overboard, they fill it with water, and you drown. So that's the idea they came up with. That what they're going to do is push them overboard. Brian's going to go hunting with Mike in the morning. In the dark, he's going to push him overboard. The waders are going to fill it with water, and he's going to drown. What you hear is that this was actually supposed to happen the week before. Remember, he went missing and was murdered on December 16, 2000. It was actually supposed to happen a week before. Brian gets a call from Denise calling it off, says no. Backing out. During that week, they discuss it. Plans are made between Denise and Mike to go to Apalachicola to celebrate their anniversary. There's even conversations possibly of new baby that Mike wants. Denise secretly is in a relationship with Brian, doesn't want to go on this trip. Pressure's mounting. Insurance policy is expiring. They talk about it throughout the week. And the plan is back on. So they start talking about how to do this thing. They limit the conversations between them. They're mindful of records. They're mindful of getting caught. And they set up their alibis. Denise is supposed to stay home, of course. She got an 18-month-old child at this particular time. So she's supposed to stay home, make phone calls so everybody knows where she's at. Brian sets up an alibi where he's actually supposed to go hunting with Kathy, his wife's his father-in-law. And he's supposed to meet up with him and go hunting with him later on that morning. And what the plan is that he will go with Mike hunting, commit the murder. Mike drown, leave him there, drive back and meet Kathy's father for his alibi. After they set up all of this and establish what their alibis are going to be, Brian kills him. He's going to tell you how it happened. That he actually followed him to Lake Seminole. They didn't drive together. They met up at a gas station and then actually followed each other there. That was important because he needed two cars there. One to get away and, of course, one to leave it. Mike's Bronco there to make it look like Mike had gone out there hunting solo. And it had been an accident. So they get in the boat together. You're going to hear Brian say that he taught Mike in actually putting the waders on. One of the things that some duck hunters do is they won't wear the waders in the boats because of the dangerous aspect of them. But they have a conversation, and he convinces them to put the waders on before they head out. So now they're heading out, and they've got the waders in the boat. Brian pushed them over. But it didn't go as planned. And Brian's going to tell you what happened next is he looks over there, and it's dark. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I think they've got a little headlight on for light. And what he's able to see is he believes that Mike is able to get out of the waders. And now he's not drowning like he's supposed to. As a result, Brian picks up a shotgun and shoots him in the head. He's going to tell you that at that point, he knew that the plan of making it look like an accident was certainly out of the equation if he leaves the body there. So he takes him and he drags him to the shoreline. And he actually drags him to the area right across. There's another landing right there by where that ranger station is that we looked earlier. He drags him to shore and he loads him up in the back of his Suburban. At this point, he said he pulled the jacket over his head so that way he didn't have to look at his friend that he had just killed. At this point, it's taken much longer than he was anticipating, and his alibi with the father-in-law is blown. So instead, he goes all the way home with Mike in the back of his truck and crawls in bed with his wife, Kathy, trying to establish an alibi. Or reestablish an alibi at that point. Later on that day, you're going to hear they took Mike to Carr Lake and actually buried him. At this point, in October 2017, we know that Mike is no longer missing. He has, in fact, been murdered. What you're going to hear is, as I said, he took him to Carr Lake. Carr Lake is up here on the north side of Tallahassee, in the Ox Bottom, and there's some grew up right in that area. Bannerman Road up there on the north side of Tallahassee. And you're going to hear that he drove him down this road, and at the end of this road is a little landing and a boat ramp. Behind these trees is where he buried him. At that time, Carr Lake was actually a lot lower. There was not much water in there, and he was able to walk into this particular area. It was dry. And he dug a hole, and he buried him. You're going to hear that over the years, Carr Lake filled back up with water. And you're going to hear that following the confession, Brian Winchester took law enforcement out to the location and showed them where he'd been buried. Law enforcement, very unique situation. How do you find remains that are underneath the lake? They have to cut away all those trees you just saw. They have to build what they call a cofferdam in order to block the water, and they have to pump the water out. And there they found Mike, exactly where Brian said he would be. Boots still on. Amazingly, the boxer's still bright red. Autopsy is conducted, x-rays are taken, and all these little dots are all the bird shot. Shot in the head, just like Brian said. Mike still has his wedding ring on. Now, obviously, this renews the investigation. Law enforcement starts working it. They go back, they try and verify and refute the things that Brian said. And you're going to have an opportunity that there are witnesses, to hear from witnesses that saw Brian and Denise together before this went public, before the relationship went public in 2003. Of course, the body was found exactly where Brian said it was, in the manner in which Brian said it would be. You're going to hear that in December of 2017, law enforcement announced that the body had been found. The body had actually been found a month earlier. There was an excavation that was done trying to find the body, as we already looked at. But we also know after that time is that law enforcement was able to secure a source. They went and talked to Kathy Winchester, now Kathy Thomas. Now, Kathy has remained friends, very close friends with Denise all these years, despite the fact that Denise was now married to her ex-husband. They still remain friends, and they talked on a regular basis. But at this point, Kathy agrees to discuss and work with law enforcement. What she tells law enforcement is she actually had sexual relations with with Denise and Brian together in Panama City prior to Mike's death. Keep in mind what Brian said. Brian said the relationship started 3 years prior to Mike's death. What she also says is that shortly after Brian's arrest, Denise sent her a message, told her to send a message. And what Denise told Kathy was, tell Marcus. Marcus is Brian Winchester's father, Marcus Winchester. Tell Marcus to tell Brian that I didn't say anything to Florida from the law enforcement. Say anything about what? Why would that be a message you have to send? Law enforcement then worked with Kathy to try and record conversations between Kathy Winchester, now Kathy Thomas, and Denise, now Winchester. And you're never going to hear a flat-out admission. She never said, yeah, I was involved in the murder. You're never going to hear that. But what you are going to hear is that Kathy confronts Denise about that statement on the recording. And she says, I remember you told me that. Denise says, yeah. Again, why make that statement? Unless Brian Winchester and her were involved in this all along. And in the end, you'll have an opportunity to hear yet. We'll play that recording for you. In the end, the state is going to ask you to end the 21 years, 3 years plus the 18 years, for adult sex, lies, and deceit, and find her guilty of these particular crimes.